We are watching President Biden, and will be tonight when he takes the podium for his State of the Union address. Biden will have to convince voters that he is still up to the job as concerns remain about his age and mental acuity. And he will have to defend policies that have failed, including excessive spending and the open border. Fox News' Peter Doocy pressed White House Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre about this yesterday. Watch.
You get a lot of questions in here about these polls concerning the president's age and his acuity. Do you think that it is going to quiet concerns about the president's age and acuity if he decides not to debate?
What I can say about that is not talking about the debate. That's something for the campaign to speak to. Not going to speak about that. To your question about age, I think I sort of answered that. I mean, you know, you're going to see the State of the Union tomorrow. You're going to hear the president lay out his plans. You're going to hear a president who has had a successful 3 years of progress. Still a lot more work to be done, but a progress nonetheless.
Former President Trump, meanwhile, challenging President Biden on Truth Social, saying this: "I am calling for debates anytime, anywhere, any place." President Trump also writing this: "We will be doing a live play-by-play of Crooked Joe's Biden's State of the Union." Hannah Cox, it looks like Trump is going for the jugular.
I think he is, and I think that might be what I choose to watch instead of Biden, because we know we're just going to get a lot of gaslighting from him, a lot of spin. It's not going to work. The American people know what they're dealing with. They understand the economy is where it's at. They're terrified of the growing conflicts overseas and how he's handling multiple fronts, and so I don't really think he's going to gain much traction tonight. I, for one, tend to live tweet it because I like pointing out when he's lying to people.
No, it's interesting to see Trump coming back after yesterday. Joe Biden said he's going to go for the jugular for Trump. Probably not a good idea with Donald Trump. He'll come right back at you.
And there's 0% chance that Biden debates Trump. I mean, and really all he has to do is just whisper, "I can't debate, I'll get in trouble." Right, I mean, that's been his go-to every time he's in front of a camera. But no, I mean, look, Donald Trump, obviously, when you look at even like the latest New York Times Siena poll, I mean, things have gotten so bad with President Biden that 10% of Biden 2020 voters have now flipped to Trump. And when you flip a voter, you're not just winning over an independent or a moderate. When you are flipping a voter, that's -1 to Biden, +1 to Trump. That's a 2-point swing. I mean, it's pretty substantial. But to Hannah's points, I mean, the economy's in a bad situation. And going on TV and talking about shrinkflation and with the Cookie Monster, that is not going to do anybody any good. That's actually very insulting to people like us and the American voters who understand that it's his inflationary policies that have us in this situation.
By the way, I'm not buying that the Cookie Monster is an independent, like Sesame Street decided to. I think that all came from the White House. It was all coordinated, whereas, oh yeah, put something out from Cookie Monster and then I'll react to it. Look what Cookie Monster said. It's so ridiculous. And this is what he's focused on while we have migrants being apprehended and committing migrant crime. Meanwhile, the Biden campaign fired back, telling Fox News Digital this: "I know Donald Trump's thirsty for attention, but if he's so desperate to see President Biden in primetime, he can join the tens of millions of Americans who will tune in to watch the State of the Union." Krisha, how do you like that response?
I think if they're going for the jugular, again, they have to do much better, because Biden is going to present the State of the Union and his achievements and tout them. Problem is, there are none. We have the Cookie Monster leading the economy. We have crisis at the border. I doubt he will mention Lake and Riley, other than maybe blaming the Republicans, saying that it's the border crisis that they caused, although we know that that's completely false, and I'm sure Donald Trump will explain that. The bar, unfortunately, though, is so low for Joe Biden because the media will buoy him and basically prop him up, because all he has to do is read from a prompter. And ultimately, I agree with Mark, he will not debate, because that will be such a stark contrast between the two candidates.
When he's up there tonight and he's trying to, I don't know, paint these policies as if they were good and blame Republicans on what has failed, do you think that's going to pass muster with the American people? Will people see right through it?
I hope so. The problem is it's the media. Yeah. They're going to say, oh, he got through this speech, he's showing stamina. Meanwhile, again, we know he's been at Camp David prepping this entire time. He hasn't been seen since in the last few days, and he didn't even give a speech on primary night.
Well, did you see the other day how Jen Psaki and on MSNBC, they were mocking Virginia and how Virginia voters are worried about immigration? It was incredible. I mean, that they are so out of touch to not recognize the issues that are important to the American people, to mock it.
And it speaks, you know, the whole border crisis has become a national crisis. It's not just a Texas thing. It's not just an Arizona thing. I mean, these migrants are ending in Denver, Colorado, Virginia, wherever they might end up.
Unbelievable.